Earlier, President Obama addressed the horrific events that took place in Charleston. He said that this tragedy reinforces the need for additional gun control measures.
This morning, I spoke with, and Vice President Biden spoke with Mayor Joe Riley and other leaders at Charleston to express our deep sorrow over the senseless murders that took place last night. Michelle and I know several members of Emmanuel AME Church. We knew their pastor, Reverend Clementa Pinckney, who, along with 8 others, gathered in prayer and fellowship and was murdered last night. And to say our thoughts and prayers are with them and their families and their community doesn't say enough to convey the heartache and the sadness and the anger that we feel. Any death of this sort is a tragedy. Any shooting involving multiple victims is a tragedy. There is something particularly heartbreaking about a death happening in a place in which we seek solace and we seek peace, in a place of worship. Now is the time for mourning and for healing. But let's be clear. At some point, we as a country will have to reckon with the fact that this type of mass violence does not happen in other advanced countries. And at some point, it's going to be important for the American people to come to grips with it. And for us to be able to shift how we think about the issue of gun violence collectively. Mother Emmanuel Church and its congregation have risen before, from flames, from an earthquake, from other dark times, to give hope to generations of Charlestonians. And with our prayers and our love and the buoyancy of hope, it will rise again now as a place of peace.
Joining us now from the White House North Lawn is Major Garrett. Major, we saw a pretty emotional President Obama today. What did you make of his statement?
Well, what I can tell you behind the scenes is the president worked long and hard on this statement. It's one of the reasons it occurred about 30 minutes later than originally scheduled, coming out about 12:15 in the afternoon Eastern time. It was scheduled for 11:45. The president gathered with his speechwriters after making a decision about 11 o'clock this morning to make a statement to the country. One of the other things that he was considering is there was some indication that the suspect might in fact soon be in custody. The president waited until that happened and that news had been announced to make his statement, but he worked very deeply and personally involved in these remarks. And as the president said, the country will have to reckon with the fact that mass shootings of this kind do not happen in other civilized parts of the world. He also, in almost the very next breath, acknowledged that the political realities in Washington, in his words, foreclose many of the avenues he would like to seek. So at one level, he was trying to raise the country's awareness and sensitize the nation, possibly desensitized to mass shooting violence, to the fact that maybe something ought to be done legislatively, but then also acknowledged that the political realities make that very difficult indeed. The president also said, I've had to make these statements too many times. How many times in his presidency? By our count, 14 public addresses to the nation in the aftermath of a mass shooting, very much on the president's mind here at the White House.
And Major, I did find it interesting that he brought up gun control during his first remarks connected to this tragic incident. I'm wondering what you make of him bringing that up so early on, and do you think he's going to be criticized a little bit for that?
Well, whether or not there's going to be criticism or not is to be determined. What I tried to ask the president as he was leaving the briefing room, what are you going to do differently on this issue? Because honestly, from a legislative and rhetorical point of view, this president hasn't done much or attempted to do much to advance his agenda on gun control since the Senate rejected the efforts he put forward after the Sandy Hook massacre that claimed 20 children's lives and the lives of 6 adult teachers. When the president lost that battle in the Senate, he more or less, though not rhetorically, but legislatively and with the muscle of the White House, gave up on future gun control. And it's been an issue so far on the back burner since then, you can't even find it. So for the president to introduce this in these remarks suggests he's still interested in it, still believes the country has to, in his words, reckon with it, but there is no clear path as exhibited by the president or described by his top advisors on how they see that issue going forward, if the president's going to talk or act differently on it, and even if he is, by acknowledging in almost the same breath that the political realities mean it's difficult to achieve, this may just be a rhetorical flourish that may not be followed up by much legislative hard work.
Major, as we're listening to you, we're also looking at live pictures of the car of Dylan Roth's car in Shelby, North Carolina. It is being towed away right now. You mentioned that might just be rhetoric from President Obama, but I'm guessing that we're going to be hearing more about this from the candidates that are running for president, don't you think?
Certainly, every event like this becomes a topic within the political conversation, and a 2016 presidential campaign will probably yield more rhetoric around this than you might otherwise see. But what matters in this context is what are the proposals, where are the votes, and how hard is the White House going to work to change the minds of those who believe, as we heard Senator Lindsey Graham say, this is hard to control in a country where there's so many people, so many freedoms, and so much ready access to firearms. Do you limit that access? Do you deal with the mental health side of this more aggressively? All of these things have been debated, but they have yet to create a new resolution, a new political or legislative reality, and oftentimes it falls to the president to set that in motion. It will be incumbent upon him to make the next move.
Major, what about the way the president has dealt in the past and now currently with issues regarding race? We've talked about this before, that at some points he's been criticized for taking too long to come out and make a public statement. I know you said he was a half-hour delayed today in this statement, but he's come out rather quickly, don't you think?
Well, certainly this is already been classified by the Justice Department as a hate crime, and a state level and federal level investigation into the hate crime aspect of this massacre is already in motion, was so before the president even took to the podium. So it would be impossible for him not to address the issue of race. And yes, as the country has dealt with Ferguson, Missouri, Baltimore, Cleveland, unrest, and a sense of grievance that minority communities have about the way law enforcement has dealt with them, currently and historically, the president has tried to weigh in on that. He's always tried to walk, and it's a cliche, but it's absolutely true in this case, a very fine line, acknowledging the difficult job that law enforcement has, but also the legitimate sense of grievance that many minority communities have. That was put in part of the context of his remarks today, but in the main, I think what most Americans will hear and take away from it was a call to deal with gun control. The specifics will have to come next.
All right, Major Garrett for us from the White House, thank you so much. Sure. And you're looking at live pictures there of Dylan Roth's car being towed away from the scene in Shelby, North Carolina.